All right, well, let me go ahead and get us started today. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kelly Testi. I've got the pleasure and honor right now of serving as the CEO of the Association of American Law Schools and also as its executive director. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this webinar on crafting scholarly work on legal education and to hear some insights from leaders in the field. I'm really pleased we've been able to bring this forward today, and I thank the editors of the JLE for doing that. I'm sure, as all of you know who have joined us today, the Journal of Legal Education is the flagship publication of AALS, and it is critical that we continue to engage with issues about legal education as the learned society, especially in this time of such rampant challenge and change within legal education. There's a lot to do and pay attention to, a lot to say, and a lot to analyze. And so I'm really pleased that we are able to bring this webinar forward today to talk about the craft of scholarship on legal education and therefore to promote excellence within it and to encourage all of you to continue to work hard on the analysis that helps make us better every day. In addition to events like this one, ALS also has a number of other things that we try and bring forward to our community to encourage excellence in scholarship and teaching and to help you connect with one another. And so, one of the things I wanted to mention today is just to remind you of all the sections that we have at ALS. I think there's something upward of 108 of those right now. But for those of you who are interested in this topic, of the webinar today, I think particularly sections like the one for new law teachers, the one on scholarship, one on teaching methods, one on legal research, writing, reasoning, and also a new section on technology, law, and legal education might be particularly of interest. Of course, there's many more depending on your own interest in particular substantive areas that you might be interested in joining. And those sections have become active not only at our annual meeting that takes place every January, but also year round with a lot of exciting webinars like this one that help keep us connected as we go through the year. I also want to remind you that ALS hosts, in addition, a number of national programs to assist with various areas of legal ed and again to help you connect with one another. And April and May are particularly busy months, as they are for all of you. We have our Becoming a Law Teacher webinar coming up, and Jim from my office is going to put the links to some of these in the chat. We have also a wonderful partnership with West Academic that's on artificial intelligence in legal ed. And there's a webinar series that we've launched as part of that. We've run one of those already on teaching. We have another one coming up on tools for faculty, and those will continue so that we can all stay abreast of the latest thinking about artificial intelligence and how it will impact probably everything that we do within legal ed. You all know that we're in quite an interesting time in our nation, and as a result, we also have a webinar series happening right now at Teach-In on professional independence and the legal profession. And that's been a very well attended and exciting series. There are 6 seminars. We've had 3, so 3 more remain, and Jim will put those in the chat as well so you can see them. And then finally, we have our big conferences coming up. We have the Clinical Legal Educators Conference in Portland, Oregon, early May, the New Law Teachers Conference in DC in early June. And then, of course, be on the lookout for our wonderful annual meeting every January. The next one in 27 is in New York City. And I know that's always an exciting place for us all to gather. So with that, I just want to say thank you for engaging here today. Thank you for being part of ALS. And with that, I want to turn it over to Professor Bill LaPiana, who will take it from here. And in doing so, I want to thank him for his leadership of the JLE as well as the other editors, and also thank all of our participants for being on today. I look forward to learning from you. Thank you so much. Bill?
Thank you, Kelly. Good afternoon or morning, everyone, depending on your time zone. I'm Bill LaPiana. I'm one of the 4 co-editors of the Journal of Legal Education and am Dean of Faculty here at New York Law School. I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. First, Olympia Duhart. is Dean and Professor of Law at Nova Southeastern University's Shepherd Broad College of Law. She teaches research and writing, constitutional law, First Amendment, and constitutional law and bioethics seminars. And she likes prints and poodles. And I will add, I really love playing with Lego. Franklin is one of four co-editors of the JLE. Her teaching experience is a wide range in legal education, from legal research and writing and lawyering skills to experiential and doctrinal teaching, academic support, and professional preparation. She's written or co-authored 4 books and more than 25 law review articles, many of which center on innovative teaching and learning in legal education. Lindsay Gustafson is a professor of law at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, the William H. Bowen School of Law, and is associate dean for academic affairs. She is managing editor of the Journal of the Legal Writing Institute and co-editor of The Law Teacher. She's published articles on improving student scholarship and on the impact of technology on student writing. She's created 3 new classes to train students in writing and editing legal scholarship. Allison Michor is professor of lawyering skills at UC Irvine and is also one of the 4 co-editors of the JLE. Her most recent work has focused on teaching interventions that create a more equitable and inclusive legal education, including developing approaches for countering the effects of trauma and stereotype threat on student achievement. Our first question that I'd like to throw out to all of you is, what do we think makes for compelling scholarship on legal education? What makes an article interesting and is likely to attract readers? And I might add, likely to get the co-editors of the JLE to publish it. Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot first, given the way my screen's arranged.
Well, the first thing is we want articles that are actually works of scholarship, right? I mean, we want ones that are heavily researched, well written, very thoughtful. There's a wide range of what that consists of because there's a wide range of what people might write about, but we want ones that are researched and written in ways that are appropriate for the subject matter. We want new ideas. I don't know that there's very much new under the sun, but there's always a variation on something that we haven't seen before. And that's the kind of thing that immediately makes us say, this is a piece we want to find something in.
Anyone else like to add to that?
No, just to say that not surprisingly, my definition is pretty close to my co-editor's Chris's, right? So I think sort of my blurb was that it's a novel contribution to a salient topic that's rigorously supported, right? So not that different from any other type of legal scholarship. And the only thing I'd really add is that I think I'm particularly interested at the JLE. We sort of think of having 3 main topics of interest. So legal education writ large, the way legal education is operating and structuring itself, innovations inside the classroom, and also new developments in the profession. And I think the very best pieces or most interesting pieces to me are maybe at the intersection of at least 2 of those pillars and maybe all 3.
Yeah, to that, I think that the scholarship has to be responsive to a practical need. We're very unique in this field that we're teachers who haven't been trained, many of us, in teaching. So I think something that is responsive to what people actually can implement in the classroom. If it's a pedagogical piece.
I want to add to that. I was thinking about like the components that get me, right? And what gets me is something that I can relate to, something that's clearly part of an ongoing conversation, so thoroughly researched. But I'm also thrilled with articles, to Chris's point, that make me think of something that in a way that I hadn't thought of it before, right? So I was thinking, as an example of that, years ago, Jerry Organ wrote a piece about how student scholarships impact students and whether we're actually getting what we want from student scholarships, something that we're around all the time, like part of our decision-making all the time. And he asked such good questions and then gathered such interesting data that he created scholarship out of it.
Can I add also that specificity helps, right? I mean, the thing is, all of us on this call and all of us who speak, we did position this as people who were sort of senior in the field. We've seen dozens or hundreds of presentations on these topics. We've read dozens or hundreds of articles. Not everybody is at that point where they've read all of those. A good article should appeal to both, right? It should appeal to people who are newly emerging themselves in this part of the profession, who have some experience with it and who have a lot of experience with it. How do you get there? Specificity. I mean, I, I'm trying to think how many leaving articles aside, how many conference presentations have I seen on teaching and learning where people say, I use games in my teaching? Okay, great. We've all seen dozens of those. And if you and your students are using a Jeopardy board to review hearsay objections, that's amazing. It's not a new idea. It's probably a terrific class, but it's not a new idea. But if you talk about that in an interesting and different way, that's going to tell me something that I haven't seen before because I've seen that version, but I haven't seen specifically how are you doing it and what is it bringing out. But if you just say use games, that's not telling us very much, right? If you instead have something, I'm making this up now, I've never seen this and I don't know that it would be a good idea. But if you want to have your students devise customized risk boards that are in order to teach international law, that's going to be already an entirely different thing. If you just say, I use games in teaching, that's not going to offer enough to anybody. And so it should be providing something that everyone can get a bite on and get a handle on, regardless of their level of experience. They're just going to have a different take on it based on where they start from.
I want to add to what Chris just said. I think the other piece of that, in addition to the specificity, is grounding it in evidence or a discipline so that someone who doesn't want to use Jeopardy in their con law class, if they understand the reason this works is because the human brain thrives on novelty, or that humans learn when they're in a social setting, right? And that there's a relationship between content, happy humans and humans who learn, right? So the science can tell us that. If you give us that foundation with one example, the viewer or the reader can then say, okay, I think novelty is important based on what I understand from how this writer summarized the research on neuroscience or cognitive learning theory. And what can I do that's novel in my class? So I think that foundation is important to give people the ability to create what they think will be successful for them.
There's a balance here, like a sweet spot, right? Where you have an idea that you can grab and transpose to whatever it is you teach, whatever it is you're doing, your administrative role, whatever it is, but enough specificity. And I wanted to say to Chris, when I hear specificity, what I think is you have to read enough in the field to know where that specific place is. Like, where are you joining the conversation? Because there are some proposals, and I've had these myself, that are so specific that no one is interested in it except for me. And so specific to me is a refined idea, right? It's an idea you come to and you read about and you think about and you find the place, like Olympia said.
Maybe we should be clear for people who haven't written this kind of thing. And right now we do seem to be talking specifically about examples of pedagogy scholarship, which, as Allison pointed out, is only one of the areas that you might be writing in. But we do publish a fair amount of this. Everyone who's taught, let's hope, has thought about their teaching. And so it's not uncommon for us to get things from people who are experienced teachers who want to tell us about the great things that they're doing in the classroom. That could be the start of a good article. But here's the great thing I did in the classroom is not the end of a good article, it's the beginning of a good article. It's got to then be connected to something else. Either here's the broader theme like Olivia was talking about. Here's what I've seen in the literature and how this connects. And that's why you could do something similar but not the same. Or, now that I've had this idea, I'm going to go back and do some research that shows why is this working? Because I'm trying to understand why that was an effective classroom moment. Any of those things are terrific, and no article can do all of them, but they have to do at least one of them. They have to start from something that is probably a personal, passionate idea, but then connect it to actually research the literature. None of us, well, I shouldn't say none of us, almost none of us come in with any real training in, even if we have a little bit of experience in teaching from a graduate program or from being a teaching assistant. Very few people come into law teaching with a real background in educational theory. It's just not what we do. But that doesn't mean that you can't go read that stuff afterwards if you're trying to write about a topic that is related to it.
Mhm.
That resonates a lot with me, Chris. We were talking sort of offline before the webinar a little bit about sort of when articles that come from experience, which ones are sort of the most useful to other law teachers. And in my thinking about that, I was actually thinking we often think about the I did this cool thing or I did this successful thing, but I actually think the teaching experiences that lead to the best articles often are the problems. Like this is a challenge that I had in my classroom and that forced me out into the literature, right? I was trying to solve a teaching need or teaching challenge that I was experiencing. And I think one thing that's useful about that is it lets you know about the conversation. So Lindsay was like, you have to know where you're joining the conversation, but that becomes your access point to what has already been said in this area. And it might all best news yet, it might solve your teaching problem, right? If you find the answer, but then also helps you think about how can I add to this? What is the contribution? And then to share it. I also think it helps you sort of know how universal your problem is and therefore how useful your article may be.
Yeah. I think that in addition to trying to solve a problem that you have, being able to directly confront, the challenge that we all bring to teaching law, we have the limitation of our own perspective. Chris said that we haven't been formally trained, but we have experienced informal training in the form of apprenticeship of observation, right? So we went to law school and we think, okay, now I can teach law school. And it's reinforced by the fact that we don't have to have any formal training in education. So we have that anticipatory socialization of what does a law teacher look like and trying to make sure that what we do confronts that in a helpful way. And a lot of us probably went through a teacher-centered model and aren't reflecting the student-centered model that we know is more effective now.
A really well-written article in legal education, in my mind, is harder to write than an article in a traditional substantive law area because we're entering space that is outside the kind of proof that we've been trained to kind of create. And so if it feels like it's easier to write, or it feels like I can just get this done before I go on to my, real scholarship, there's probably more there to learn. At least that is my experience.
I thought you were going to say if it's easy to write, it's probably hard to read.
Yes.
I've heard that one. And I think the opposite is true. If it's hard to write, it might be easier to read, right?
Absolutely. I had an experience with one of the first articles that I wrote, and it was in educational psychology, kind of a little bit of that. And I thought about it for a while, and I'd read about it for a while, and I reached out to an expert on main campus on learning theory, and she didn't even understand my first email query. Like I was so outside of her lingo that it took a while for us to even connect. It was so important that I did that. But my little kind of stumbling around in her expertise, it took a long time to finally understand where my piece was.
That might be a good point to ask for. Perhaps I was going to direct this mainly at Chris and Olympia first. We've talked a lot about other areas of knowledge that we should know about in order to write these things effectively. But I think Lindsay's last comment brings up something of a dilemma, which is kind of how deeply does one need to go? What does your own experience perhaps tell about how much and how deeply one needs to go into these other areas? We've named some of them, but there may be more in order to effectively use them in talking about the way we teach.
Olympia, do you want to go first on that one, or do you want me to?
I can start because I'm thinking about an iceberg. This is the way I kind of teach my writing students too. Like we are looking at the top of the iceberg, but you should have this, in my opinion, a really deep knowledge of the material because we aren't doing anything really new, but we want to make sure that it's accessible to people who have expertise. It's helpful to them. It's accessible to people who are novices in the field, and that we are making a positive contribution to the literature, right? And we're competing for people's time. We haven't talked yet about the fact that we also should be thinking about interest. Is it fun? Is it exciting to read? Because it's not always riveting to read educational pieces or scholarly pieces. I think, when I think about this question and like the areas of knowledge, before I get into the depth or expand on the depth, I think there's a really wide scope. We've talked about cognitive science and learning theory. We should be thinking about neuroscience, anthropology. We should be thinking about leadership. We should be thinking about motivation and culture shift and community. I think there are a lot of pieces that can inform instruction about pedagogy. I would encourage folks to think about like focusing on one discrete area, and not try to do everything all together all at once, whatever the name of that movie is, right? Like just sort of like zero in, and not think that everything that you have in your brain or in your digital toolbox or your actual box has to appear on paper. That you get to reserve that base of knowledge to inform what you actually put down and expect people to read.
Yeah. So, Bill, your question was how deep do you need to go, right? I mean, what's interesting is I feel like we all sort of know the answers to how deep you need to go when we're writing in things that are specifically within our sort of niche fields in law. And then we get into writing about legal education. And because it's no one's real niche field, but yet it's everyone's field, who is the audience of all people who care about legal education, we get weird, and yet we should be bringing in the exact same set of skills. The problem is we know the literature confidently in whatever is our niche area that is not about legal education. What you want to do when you're writing this stuff is get to the same place of confidence, right? I think of legal scholarship as the ultimate exercise in anxiety. There's no way in which you ever feel like you're finished. There's no way in which you ever feel like you're done. The usual advice to junior scholars is stop writing, start getting it out. It'll be okay. You're going to write another piece. And don't try to put everything into one piece that makes it a worse piece. And by the way, you'll never finish that way. All of that remains true. And the funny thing is, it remains true for people who are confident scholars in other areas if they then switch, say, in the middle of their or later parts of their career to writing some of this legal ed stuff, because even though they may be solid and experienced scholars, they're new in this area. And it's worth remembering all of the stuff that we would tell to beginning scholars still applies to us if we're writing in new fields. I think I have the unique advantage of having no expertise in about 19 fields that I work in. So I'm quite used to being comfortable not knowing what I'm talking about. But in theory, that's not how you're supposed to go about a scholarly career, right? But the goal every time you're writing one of these pieces is to know enough that you're not trying to prove that you've done the homework. And yet you are constantly referencing and using and working off of the stuff that's out there instead of acting as if it doesn't. If I'm seeing somebody who's writing about sort of something that is related to kind of traditional educational theory, I'm going to expect that they've read Dewey and Piaget and Howard Gardner and maybe Lev Vygotsky. If I'm seeing people writing about stuff that is about changes in legal education in the United States, I'm going to expect that they're entirely in and out familiar with the McCrate report, the Carnegie report, best practices. It doesn't mean that they need to be endlessly rewriting that stuff. God knows that there's been too much written about all of those things. What it means is they know enough about it to figure out where is it relevant, dive in, reference it where it's relevant, but then go on to the things that are really most directly applicable to what they're doing. Right? I expect that people will be comfortable reading and working with social science materials. I mean, I cheat as much as everybody else. I've gotten a huge amount of learning theory from secondary books like Benedict Carey. If you haven't read, How We Learn, if you haven't read Duckworth, if you haven't read the stuff that is sort of pop available to give you a kind of contemporary survey of how people think about, if you want to look at heuristics, look at thinking fast and slow. If you want to think about learning theory, there's you look at Daniel Willingham, or you look at Make It Stick. There's a lot of that stuff, but it's all sort of popular journalistic writing about actual social science. I don't have any problem with somebody using that stuff to teach themselves and then only later, maybe even after they've half drafted an article, going back and reading the original sources. But I will assume that they will have read the original sources at some point and not be citing only the secondary reporters who are talking about this stuff. So yeah, that's enough. But I will confess openly how many of my own articles I've written by starting not from the real sources and reading the sources as I was half done with developing what I was saying. If everybody wants to judge me now, you should feel free.
I was just going to add that's consistent with, research, legal research, right? You start at the secondary sources, you use them to identify primary sources, and then you still have to look at the primary sources.
I see that someone in the chat asked if we could be specific about those sources, so I will slow down and repeat it. I find if you have not read it, the best, most accessible book to cover sort of at least as of about 10 years ago, contemporary learning theories by a New York Times journalist named Benedict Carey. I think it's called How We Learn. And it covers things that are now quite commonly talked about, like spaced repetition and interleaving, and sort of updates on how people process information. I actually think that that's a thing that most law professors would benefit from reading through because it's a very quick and easy read, and it summarizes a lot of the science that's out there. If you're going to write anything about traditional educational theory, which has some applicability in law, but only some, because so much of it is based on childhood education. And adult education is just fundamentally different from educating developing brains. But you should at least be familiar with Dewey, Piaget, Paulo Freire, maybe Bandura. You should be able to reference Bloom's taxonomy because everyone does, and you should therefore know what they're talking about when they do. Although it's at this point a little bit stereotypical. I gave a talk once in which some friends of mine had prepared a bingo card about things that they expected me to say. And in the center square was Bloom's taxonomy. And they were right. I said it, and they giggled in the back of the room when I did. You should be able to talk comfortably about Claude Steele and stereotype threat. You should be able to talk comfortably about grit and some of the critiques of the contemporary critiques of Duckworth, but it also know what actually Duckworth says, because what a lot of people say she says is not what she says. And some of the critiques have more to do with what people have said she's done rather than her actual work. I think Thinking Fast and Slow is a really helpful text for understanding heuristics, but it's really a social science and almost economic analysis, so I don't know that it's as directly relevant. The last one I would mention is Daniel Willingham. He did a book, he's written several things, but he did a book called Why Do Kids Hate School? That is really talking about the importance of, it's aimed at children's education, but it's talking about the importance of hands-on experiential learning and why that's more engaging. And I think all of us who've taught in law schools would recognize how applicable that is to our adult learners as well.
If I could just say one more thing real quickly about the metaphor that I use, I like the iceberg metaphor. The metaphor that's in my head is you have to develop accuracy, right? Like you've got to know enough to be accurate. And sometimes when we enter a discipline that's not our own, we don't know if we're looking at the whole ocean, or are we looking at a pond? Are we looking at an inlet? And so these sources that Chris recommended, so fantastic, because it can give you a quick feel for where your research fits in everything. And so you can be more accurate with your use of any kind of research that you then chase, because you know kind of the broader picture. Even if you don't know the broader picture, you know where you fit in that broad picture. And so I think those shortcuts are so helpful. Such a great recommendation.
I wanted then to pitch the next question to Allison and Lindsay, which is something we've covered a little bit, but maybe we can do it in more detail. I want to write about what I've done, and I think everyone has mentioned this a little about my innovative thing in the classroom. what are the best ways to make sure other people might benefit from things you have found that work? And what's the relationship between that to embedding it in this wider, um, broader approach of knowledge that we've been talking about here?
Lindsay, you want to go first or?
Go ahead, Allison.
All right. So I don't have too much. I mean, I sort of gave my spiel before, but and I think actually was drawing on things that everybody has already said, right? Is to really the big thing is to lock into the why, right? So why did it work? Why didn't it work? And embedding it in some research and some theory that's really helpful. I think the additional thing I might add in sort of thinking about this is keeping in mind is sort of more of a mindset than a to-do list is keeping in mind that your experience at your law school is not representative of all law schools across the US. I think sometimes from the editorial position, we sort of read efforts to situate what they're doing within the larger discussion, which is absolutely something that you should do, but making a statement that implies that every single classroom in an American law school is still entirely Socratic and nobody is aware of the Carnegie Report, right? That sometimes there's this, the way that we went to law school, there is an assumption that that monolithically is what is still occurring in today's classrooms. And in fact, there's a lot of diversity of innovation out there, right? Not all law schools are in the same place or in the same ways, but sometimes I sort of you have to think we're in a postmodern world, we're in a post-Carnegie world. So while it's really, really important to be aware of the Carnegie Report, or aware of McCrae, to recognize that we're like 10 plus years, right? Once we're in decades after those sources, that's no longer a necessarily a accurate representation on the ground of what's happening now. And so just to be attuned to that when you're framing what the problem is that you're solving or helping to add to the solution to, the problem has shifted as we have, in a good way, responded to some of the concerns that have been raised earlier.
I heard a metaphor last week on NPR. A guy was talking about AI and its impact on all jobs. And he said, everyone is moving into the dark together. We're moving into the dark together. Some of us can see 50 feet in front of us, and some of us can see 500 feet. And, you know, everything is in flux right now. So if you're interested in anything in legal education, it's relevant right now, right? So we have a new bar exam that makes our curriculum something we should think hard about. We have a whole lot to talk about accreditation and new challenges there, new opportunities there. So if your interest is there, we have just, of course, AI. So whatever we're doing in the classroom, there are so many conversations we can join. Everything's moving, everything's relevant, everything's interesting right now, I think, potentially. So I was thinking like, I think Allison said everything so well. But I was thinking, so what would I do if I did something in my class and I left that class and I thought, wow, I had a problem and I think that worked. Like what is the next step? So I think one thing you could do is follow the line of how do I know it worked? Like what was my problem? How do I think this solved it? And then really push back on that idea. And because the pushing back will lead you to interesting kind of thoughts and scholarship and detail. Another thing you could head on is, no, I know it worked. Here's the evidence that I have that it worked. And I'm going to go find out why it worked, to Allison's point. Find that research that is outside our discipline that shows you why it works. And then another place you could go is with data, right? If you really want to invest in a teaching idea and you want to prove in some empirical way that it works, that's a really interesting way. I repeat. Yep. Can you guys hear an echo? Or is it just me?
We can hear the echo.
You're gonna have the echo.
Oh, now I'm done. Okay. So that's another way to kind of create scholarship, and that's time consuming, and doing empirical research, especially in teaching and learning, is very difficult, challenging, because we can't treat our students like guinea pigs. But a lot of really interesting scholarship there. So that's those are the kind of routes that I think I would take a really good experience in the classroom.
And maybe,
I'm sorry,
sorry,
go.
Bill.
Please, Allison, please go
No,
ahead.
just to follow up directly on what Lindsay said about the did it work? So one thing, this is more just if you the pre-writing the article, right? But if something goes well and you think you might want to use it as the source of scholarship or the starting point for scholarship, I'd encourage you to think about how are you going to show that it worked, right? Because I think we all know experienced teachers, you know when the class went well. I'm not meaning to doubt anyone's you can tell when the students are into it and they enjoyed it. But we all know that's not necessarily the same thing as them learning from it. And so just to sort of note for yourself, and it's probably good for you as in your teaching practice, you might be doing this already, is building into your class, right? How am I going to check that that exercise that felt really great worked well in a way that I can look back on it later and support myself when I'm making the claim boldly, right? That I did a great class, and you're looking to show that it worked. Are you collecting your own empirical data, whether that's how they did on the next assignment relative to how students the year prior did, or did you do some kind of secondary formative assessment to check in? Just to also be mindful before you write the article, are you building the data set that you need to support yourself? Sorry, Bill, back to you.
No, only that I was going to basically say that just over again,
Brilliant.
somewhat more abstract terms, because assessment is of ever-growing importance. And if you can help to explain to your readers, I actually was able to assess this, and this is how I reflected back on what happened. That's exactly the kind of approach what we're doing in the classroom that frankly the authorities, and I'll at least use that for the small a for now, are more and more looking for. So advice along those lines of enormous, I think, usefulness. We have a wonderful question in the Q&A asking about what your writing processes are like. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask, what are your writing processes like? Who would like to start? Or will I have to call on someone?
You got to call on someone.
Okay, Chris, go ahead.
That's not fair. All right. A lot of it depends on what area I'm writing in and how much I know about it, which is usually not enough because I tend to move into areas I don't know enough about in far too frequently. Um, I was I realized recently that I almost always write out of rage. Like whatever I've last been yelling about with my friends is probably my next article. And that's covered, anything from legal doctrine to, very kind of descriptive pieces to I've done some very experimental pieces. So whatever it is, it's like the first thing I've got to do is I've got to really care about the idea. If I don't care enough about the idea to be yelling about it over dinner, then I'm not going to be able to care about it enough to sustain months of reading and researching and writing. I cannot do that. I cannot write just out of duty or just out of this is important for my career. Like that's just not going to motivate me, right? It's got to be something I'm interested in, and I realize I'm most interested in the things that have gotten me exercised and make me angry a lot. So, that may say more about me as a human than, or maybe it says something about living in 21st century America. I don't know. But once I've got that, then the next thing is to figure out what does the shape of it look like. And like I said, I've written some very non-traditional, I've written articles that included fiction. I've written articles that included art. I've written articles that included dialogue to figure out how can I make this work that in a way that makes the weird stuff going on in my head accessible to people who are not weird and not in my head. Although I'm writing to law professors, so weird may be taken for granted, but the in my head is not. But figuring out a shape and a format is the next thing. I am someone who has anxiety about blank pages. I doubt I'm the only one. And the way that I manage my anxiety about blank pages is I give myself small sections to fill in. And so rather than write out outlines, which I used to do when I was young and started writing and I hated it, what I do instead is write headings, which is of course an outline, but it's a different outline and an outline that feels accomplishing and it doesn't feel scary to me. So I'll do that first. I've long since accepted the fact that whatever I write as my introduction at the beginning is not going to be my introduction at the end, and every article needs to rewrite the introduction. So sometimes I skip that and sometimes I write it. It depends on whether I need that to get the pump primed. If I do, I do, and then I'll come back and just rewrite that at the end. But other times I just jump into the part. Once I've got that framework, I feel contained and safe and comfortable. And now I can say, today I'm writing this piece and today I'm writing that piece. I often, particularly for pieces about legal education, I admittedly I've worked in this field a lot. I do know a lot of what's out there, so I'm probably not writing as blind as I was when I was younger. But even then, I will often start sketching out ideas because I feel more confident when I have text. Then I'll go back and start filling in the footnotes and doing more research to build up on, which inevitably makes me edit and change the text. But it makes me feel much more confident and much more comfortable because I'm not freaking out about the fact that later I've got to write something. I've already achieved a little bit of writing. Even if it's writing I'm going to entirely throw out later. So this is me describing an entire process of anxiety management, but I suspect as a lawyer, I'm not the only person who's ever felt that way. So that's my process.
I'm gonna go next because mine is like Chris's, but it's the mirror, it's the opposite of it. I write about legal education, but in pedagogy, but I also write about vulnerable communities. So that part of me is fueled by my rage and my disgust and my disappointment with government failures. The other part of it is usually me being excited. I read something that I think I can use. Like Allison described earlier, I've had some failures in my classroom, and I finally think I figured out how to fix this issue in my classroom. And I want to tell the world that there's a really cool way to address this issue that I think a lot of us are struggling with. I lock in on what I think is a good lead. I spent 10 years as a reporter, so I spent a lot of time agonizing on what the lead will be in my article because I want people to read my piece and I want a good hook. And once I get that, I kind of like build out around that, which is not necessarily the best way to do it. But it excites me and it keeps me kind of motivated. So then I have a theory and theme for the piece. I do have to make sure that I don't get lulled by the siren of research because now with, the computer, we can just go in and dive. And the dirty little secret is a lot of us can get lost in the research. We like being in this field. We like this area. We're interested by it, or we're motivated to get more deeply entrenched in it. But it's also a good way to avoid looking at a blank piece of paper. So, you have to just be mindful that you can do a lot of research, but when are you going to put words on the paper? I, for many, many years, have gone into a hibernation mode when I have a big deadline. I need to be alone. I can't be in the office. I can't be at home. I can be in a hotel, and I can spend a couple of days in a hotel. And it's a good use of my points on my credit card to go there, be alone, and write and get to know the people who are at the restaurant, go to the gym at the hotel, make my walks. And I can feel if I get a serious mass of something accomplished there, I can come back into the real world. But that becomes harder and harder to do the more responsibilities you have at home and at work. But it's something that I still try to carve out time to do.
I can go next. I don't think I'm motivated by rage so much. I think I'm motivated by curiosity. A lot. So I have like a running list of things that I'll hear in any kind of context that I'm curious about. And I also really find a lot of value. This is probably obvious to everybody else, but I let things cook in my brain way too long. And then I try to articulate it to someone else and I realize, oh, that actually doesn't make any sense, right? Like, oh, I don't actually know what I'm talking about there. So getting out pretty early and talking to people, even like my husband, who is not a lawyer, just really has helped me, that verbalization. I work from a dump file, and I am really driven. My writing is really driven by a need to find organization. So I do write the intro pretty early. Absolutely, Chris. It changes, and it kind of guides my feel for the organization. So I print a dump file off of everything that I think is relevant and interesting and While I'm dumping into this file, I'm telling myself why I think I've put this information there, where I think it fits, and I print the whole thing out and I come at it with markers and I try and bring some order. So that feeling of bringing order to a lot of ideas really drives my writing. That's the part that I really enjoy. That part of feeling like you're organizing your sock drawer is kind of that itch that I scratch there. I also wanted to mention like what you do when you find the article that you thought you were writing. That is a really interesting space. I don't know if that's happened to you guys, where I will be like working along and I'll stumble on something and I think, oh, that's what I thought I was writing, and it's so much better than what I think I was doing. And it's happened to me a couple of times. And when my personal belief is there's always space for another article. And it has been my experience that I keep going, I keep reading, I keep thinking, and then I can see the holes, the gaps that I can fill, and then I can see how I can pull alongside this article or push against it or whatever it is. I can see the space for my voice, but if it hasn't happened to you, it will happen to you. You can be super intimidated by a piece. And then also you have to think about, do I like print the piece off and I have it sitting next to me on my desk so I know exactly where that piece is? Or do you walk away from it for a little while? And I think it depends on the situation. The two times it's happened to me, I really needed to walk away for a little while and do my own research, do my own thinking. And then I came back to the piece and realized that I'd written something very different. And I just needed the space to do that. So do not despair when that happens to you.
And Lindsay, did you cite to the piece?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, right. Like it also can work to legitimize your note. You know, I am speaking in this space just like somebody else has, but here, yes. And because they ended up being very different pieces, the citations weren't as frequent as I worried that I was going to be writing a piece that would like keep citing this other piece that's actually a little bit better than what I do. But no, it became a distinct piece.
I don't have too much to add because everything you guys said was so wonderful and it resonates with me. I'll just co-sign that I think it is really important that whether it's rage or curiosity or joy, you have to love you have to have a why that is not, I have a writing requirement, and my promotion file is coming soon, right? Because you will not enjoy writing it. It will be so hard to write it if you don't care about your topic. And I also have almost an identical approach to what Chris and pretty much everybody else describes. And I really want to, for me, I 100% fall into that. I can get sidetracked by the research. And then that's when all the research, then I've lost the iceberg. Like everything is above, we're more like a mountain and we can see the whole mountain above land because I get snowed in. So I really find I'm a former litigator. And I teach legal writing. So I'm a big believer in the introduction as preliminary statement. Like and it may change, but I write it to get my thoughts out and thinking about point headings, right? And really even maybe thinking about the introductions to those pieces. Again, they may change, but it helps keep me focused. And then I go do more work and come back and fill it in. I think that's really important. The only thing I'll add, because is a process thing, because I think we might all relate to this. As I said, I teach legal writing and lawyering skills. That means I have a lot of contact hours. Like I am not going to a hotel this week, Olympia, or last week or the week before. During the semester, it's really hard for me to find time to write. As much as I know, you're supposed to build in time, blah, blah, blah. I'm not really doing any of my writing until May. And sometimes the feast or famine nature of that process can really seize me up from a writer's block perspective. So one thing so momentum, if you can give yourself, if you're in a similar situation where the time to write is precious and it's coming in a big chunk, I would suggest you don't have to write the article, but maybe it is writing the abstract or the précis so that you can have your introduction, thinking about it. Well, I have a dog, so I do a lot of dog walking, thinking through the ideas and just having something on the page so that when May 10th hits, you're not seized up by like, okay, now's my time. I have to do everything right now. And the pressure to write can sometimes be counterproductive, right? And so then to also give yourself some grace in those longer stretches, That is your designated time to work on it. And if you have a work style like Olympia, where like you really want to just do only that for a few days, that's great. Or maybe it's I have this month, and that doesn't mean you have to work on it 8 hours a day, right? Being disciplined and saying, I'm going to do that section this morning, and then I'm going to work on class planning or walk my dog some more or go to the beach. Just having the discipline and consistency and giving yourself the grace that as long as you're working on it, you're making progress and not freaking out that it's not done instantly.
Can I pick
I
up
love that.
on that and what Allison just said about May in particular? Um, when I was younger and earlier in my career, I used to feel like, well, as soon as my classes are starting to wind down, it depends on what you're teaching. You might in May get 150 exams, or you might be, almost done and not really doing very much. It really depends on what kinds of classes you're teaching and how many students you have. But I used to feel May would hit and I would feel like I need to be writing and my brain is mush. As it happens, I'm also a woodworker and a carpenter, and I got in the habit many years ago of designing a piece of furniture over the winter as I was designing my articles. I had both of them in my head, not necessarily on paper, but eventually they came on paper, and I realized no, May is when I need to build a piece of furniture. Now I have an advantage, and it's just random. I happen to be a very quick writer. I realize that not everybody is, and you certainly don't have to be an effective writer, but it does mean that I can be fairly compressed about my writing in a way that doesn't work for everybody. But I realized that trying to expect myself to be ready to write at the end of a year of teaching was not happening. And so I was just feeling like crap and not accomplishing anything. And then eventually I decided, no, I need to accomplish something that does not use those brain cells. If you are a dancer, go dance. If you need to go to the beach, go to the beach. Whatever you are, it might be that you need to be that for a while before you're ready to go back to being a legal academic and throw yourself into the writing. And it used to be that I would accomplish very little in May and beat myself up over it. Now I accomplish very little in May, and I think of that as part of my process.
Yeah, I love that. I want to add that, of course, the question was asked about our own writing processes, but you have to be authentic and know who you are, right? When I was new to this, there was a writing group that this wonderful senior faculty member was organizing at the school, and they met early in the morning, on the weekends in the summer. I'm not a morning person. It was hell on earth for me. And I was like, what am I doing here? I can't drink enough coffee to pay attention. My brain did not turn on until noon. So I had to realize that, we're giving you what works for us, but you have to think about what works for you. I respond well to external deadlines. We didn't talk about before you write, should you do a whip? We're having a half baked here at the school in a few weeks where we just come with an idea and we share an idea. It's a half baked idea and we talk about it. It's hard to get into that space when you don't think you have some mastery of the material, but it's important, I think, for you to figure out, can I get in there? Can I talk about it? Can I share a really crappy draft with someone I trust who can give me some feedback instead of waiting until it's perfect? But again, it has to be reflective of who you are and how you've been successful in the past.
We have enough questions and answers to keep us going for hours yet. But I do think that there's one thing that sort of, I think, might bear on some of them, which is, and maybe we could sort of go around the table quickly. What do you see in an article that immediately makes you want to read it and actually trust what it says?
I'll go real quick. I love a good introduction. And for me, introductions go astray when they are an obvious hook, get a little corny. I want a direct, really well written, tight or introduction that gives me enough context to understand what it is that I'm reading. If you can write a really good introduction, a compelling introduction that is right on your thesis and provides this accurate amount of context, I'll keep reading.
I would say personal voice. I mean, I think that's particularly important if you're writing about pedagogy. But I think it's true in all scholarship that a lot of people at the beginning of their careers, especially, and some people are told this by senior people in their schools, in which case, if that's what you're supposed to do, that's maybe what you're supposed to do. But people write in this sort of deracinated, kind of um, off at a distance tone. And I don't think that makes it more serious. I don't think that makes it more scholarly. I just think it makes it more dull. I want I want a human being to be writing, and I want to see their humanity in the way that they write. And the fact that their humanity might be different from mine makes the world more interesting. It doesn't make for a less successful piece.
Can I just co-sign those two answers?
Yeah.
Because those are
Yeah,
perfect. I like both of those. The other thing I would only add was something that's novel. I like, we're doing these old things in new ways, and I get excited, when I see something, oh yeah, I really haven't thought about that. This is kind of cool. Or even applying something in another discipline to what we're doing in the classroom. Okay.
And just quickly, anything you don't want to see?
I'm going to pick up on one that Allison said earlier, which is I don't want to see people saying everybody's taught by Professor Kingsfield and takes one high stakes exam at the end of the semester and nobody does any kind of experiential learning. That is still true, or more true than it ought to be in legal education. And I think we all know that. But I think we also know that there have been enormous inroads against that and a lot written about why we shouldn't be doing that. And I don't want to see pieces that act as if nothing has changed in legal education in 50 years, or that sets up what everybody else is doing as bad in order to make what I'm doing as good. It's like, if the stuff is good, it's good. And it can be good amidst a lot of other good things. You don't have to trash everybody else's stuff, or the stereotype of everybody else's stuff.
I don't want to see pieces that erase many parts of the populations, that ignore the realities of the diversity challenges, the socioeconomic challenges, neurodivergence. I don't want to see people erased in scholarship.
I'd echo what Olympia said, and also note it that relates to what kind of law school you're at, right? Right. Where, that there's a diversity of experience. It's easier to get a job from students are in situationally different situations depending where they are, right? As problematic as US, it has an impact on their world, right? So also assuming, sort of thinking about law schools, right? And not erasing one type of law school experience as well.
Can I add one to the pieces that are interesting to me? So when I'm reading a piece, I will frequently look at the whole thing quickly, right? Like what are the components here? And an appendix with specific material is interesting to me, right? Like something that I could take straight from an appendix, but the piece itself justifies its use and explains its place and the problems that it solves. But a really nice set of appendices, they're interesting to me also.
We have a minute left, and in that minute, we do have a question about submitting to the JLE. So I'll do the advertisement. We accept submissions all year. They all come through Scholastica. We require them to be exclusive, and we promise you to get back with you in no more than a couple of weeks with a yes or no. And I feel good saying that because I hope we've inspired many of you to write in this area.